Coast Davengers.
Good morning, everybody. And before we get to the Mark Bagley interview, I just want to say thank you for joining. There was a little audio issue on my end, and sometimes it just kind of cuts out the audio. I didn't censor anything at all in that regard, but I hope you really enjoy this interview with Mark Bagley, one of the legends of Marvel Comics. Good morning, friends. Today's interview is a big one. Somebody that I've been looking at his artwork for years. He has spent almost as much time with Peter Parker as Spider-Man actually has, with runs on Amazing Spider-Man, an epic record-breaking run on Ultimate Spider-Man. He was also the first artist on New Warriors, as well as Trinity for DC, and one of my more recent, in the last 10 years, favorite stories, Life Story. And I'm talking about Mr. Mark Bagley. Hey, Mark.
Hey, that's the Mark Bagley to you.
The Mark Bagley. I'm sorry. Let's just start that over.
You Google me first, and it's like, you're the Mark Bagley? Yeah. So
no, I'm the imposter. You're actually. Is there any
a nuclear physicist, and he's got to be thinking a comic book guys, So anyway, sorry.
Is there any
too much caffeine this morning?
Is there any possible way to prove that you're not the Mark Bagley clone?
I had a twin brother.
That's right.
Yeah. So we were very, very fraternal.
Wow. Well, you're whatchamacallit, you run on the Clone Saga. It's part of your life. So, clones are always going to be there. So let's go to the beginning. And I know you've told your origin story, but
my origin story is my dad did something bad to my mommy and I came along.
I guess that's technically all of our origin stories.
Yeah. All right.
Japan. You lived in Japan as a kid a little bit, right?
Yeah, for about 6 months, and I was about 6, I think. I've got very few memories. It was the first time I've ever seen a naked man's ass, though. Road, I look over to the right, and there's this Japanese guy coming out of one of the, they love their hot tubs outside. Mm-hmm. He's coming out of his hot tub, naked as the day he was born, about 30 feet from the road. He was like, that was weird.
That sounded like a line from Airplane, by the way, but which, kind of is. Have you ever seen a grown man naked? Well, there you go. Japan.
There I like my men strong and black.
Because the reason why I asked is I was just wondering I know your first comic, you talked about Superboy 99, but I was wondering if you were looking at any manga when you were in Japan as a young kid.
Oh no, I wasn't into, we had no money at all. And we lived on army bases, on an army base. I mean, it was a really weird posting for like 6 months. We were like in this little apartment building, a bathroom down the hall. It was strange.
I was just wondering about that because it's one of those things that, like, I see some manga influence in your work, but I was just wondering if it started there. But we can talk about that in a little bit. So you get back to the States and you start to discover comics, right?
Yeah. Much to my dad's chagrin.
And do you remember, besides the Superboy book and like certain artists that you were looking at, but anything that, anything weird, like maybe, I know you were looking at Buscema, Kane, and Ramita, but was there any like horror stuff or anything of the DC nature like that, like House of Mystery, House of Secrets?
Later, I mean, when I was a kid, I didn't have that much access to it, so it was what I would just run into. Like I remember in Hawaii passing a storefront and they had comics. I looked over and it's the Thor cover with him facing us off against Hercules. And they're like, it's like a torso shot and they're grabbing. I just was like, I would kill for that comic right now. But my mother was like, no way. But later on, in my teens, I got into like Warren comics and that sort of thing. I don't really have any manga influence.
Mm-hmm.
Hell, I've probably got more of that now than I used to have because I look at what everybody does to kind of keep them fresh,
Right.
I think what might be kind of manga-ish is like the Gil Kane influence I have because his style was so, graceful and so it just had that sort of feel to it, I think.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Manga may be telling me I'm full of shit, but that's my.
I don't think I saw, like, I knew who Kane was growing up, but the more I go deeper into some of the Green Lantern stuff.
Yeah, Gil Kane was like one of my major influences in his Green Lantern stuff and his, I think his Spider-Man run made especially with John Romita inking him,
Hmm.
just that blew me away. And I think that's when I became a huge fan of his, but I was already aware of him. And, he became sort of a caricature of himself later on, which a lot of artists do. But that his early stuff and his middle stuff, that's just as good as anybody's ever done. He was kind of, but aside from that,
Yeah, well, I mean, you can't
we,
choose the personality,
yeah, exactly.
you know. Um, so I know, the legend and the true story is that you hit that 83 tryout, Marvel tryout book, the oversized thing.
Mhm.
But before that, you were working at Lockheed, right?
Yeah, yeah. I'd gotten out of art school and I was doing construction. Did construction for 3 years, framing houses with a couple of my brother-in-laws, and I suck at that sort of thing. But I showed up to work every day and worked hard, and I was always trying to get into comics, but I fell off a couple roofs, and physically, it got to the point where this is getting really rough, and I got a job at Lockheed. My sister-in-law, luckily, had a job similar. She said,
Mhm.
try out. And basically a technical artist. And that kept me busy for 3 years. And just about the time the Marvel Trial Contest book got me going.
Before the tryout book, were you creating comics? Were you just doing it at all as a hobby or just kind of?
I was always trying to get into, I mean, I don't know how many sample letters I sent in, and I was always working on comics. I'm not a writer, so I did things like, um, Marvel came out with a series of Marvel. I don't know if Marvel, but anyway, they published a series of paperbacks with short stories, prose short comic stories. One
Mhm.
an Avenger story involving Ultron, and I think I was in the service at the time, so had to be 17, 18 years old, and so I adapted that into a comic. It turned into like a 40-page comic or something like that, and the cool thing about it was, I was, drawing wise, yeah, that's terrible. But storytelling wise, a year or two later, George Perez illustrated the exact same story. They published it in comic, and I was looking at George's, and his is drawn so much better than mine. But a lot of the storytelling beats were so similar, and some of them almost exactly the same, except he had
Mhm.
5 panels than I ever did. I'm kidding about that, but anyway, it gave me the idea that maybe I am kind of learning some of the craft outside of just the drawing end of it.
Mhm. Um, there's certain parts of the country had really a lot of self-published stuff, zines, and like, a local comic scene. Did you ever, I mean, I know you said you were in the military, but was there ever a point you were trying to tap into that, like trying to find other cartoonists?
Nah, I'm really kind of a hermit. I mean,
Mhm.
I've got 5 brothers and a sister, and none of them ever read a comic book. And there was always I always kind of kept it on the down low,
Yeah.
and it ate me up. I mean, the amount of drawing I was doing, and just I was kind of a recluse.
Mhm.
Not real good. Yeah, my brothers were all like jocks, and that turned me into more of a normal guy. If I hadn't had them, I don't know what I'd be doing.
Yeah.
It did kind of stunt my reaching out to people and being out there about what I was into. There wasn't I mean, nowadays it's okay. You're into comics, cool. That is cool. Back then, there was a real subculture, and you
Sure.
had to glom onto that. And I wasn't. I lived on army bases, and I never lived in places where it seemed to be that there was a big comic culture. The first comic book convention I ever went to, I was probably 22 or 23 years old. He was here in Atlanta after I married my wife.
Mhm. That was that Dragon Con or was that a
It
smaller
was
con?
really early Dragon Con.
Yeah.
And like I said, it was the first one. It's before I got into comics big time. I just paid to go in, and I think I took samples in, and John Byrne ripped me a new one, and deservedly so. But it was an interesting experience.
It's it's just one of those things that I like to see where the path goes because like you said, it is definitely territorial. San Francisco or Seattle or New York and
Right.
certain places have these, Toronto, these local comic scenes. But it kind of goes in line with when I had Erik Larsen on, even though he was in the Northwest and surrounded by cartoonists when you think about who came from the Northwest, there was only the two guys that he really did anything with was the guys that he published graphic fantasy with. And so it's just I like the history of
N-
that.
Nobody likes Eric, so that's a joke. Now I just saw him recently. We got along famously. Yeah, there's a lot. I mean, hell, Atlanta's got a huge comic book contingency. The guys used to run Gaijin Studios and all that. But back in the day, I mean, they're on the other side of Atlanta, which is a 45-minute to an hour drive, which doesn't sound like a long time, but Atlanta traffic. And I had no money at all to be hanging out and drink. I had a wife and a kid, and I was doing construction, and and then I got Lockheed, and I didn't have the time. I just didn't. And like I said, I'm kind of a hermit.
Sure.
I've got very few friends, not very few real close friends here that I see, and I don't want new friends. So, that was sort of my life.
I get it. No, I totally get it.
My wife swears, even when I was doing construction, I was coming home every day and drawing and plugging away. So,
Well, I mean, and that leads you to, 83 with this tryout book. You won it, which is it's this famous book. I mean, at least in the comic circle, obviously it's a pretty well-known book. And then so take me through that.
okay, it's I've told the story 1,000 times, and I think it's even online a couple of times. But I was 27, working at Lockheed. It's not a great job, but I was at a desk doing technical drawings and that sort of thing. And Marvel at the time was having some real bad image issues.
Mhm.
There was just stuff going on, and Marvel came out with the trial book, and it was $12.95. My daughter actually got me a copy of it for Christmas a couple of years ago. I hadn't seen the damn thing. I used to tell people it was $20, but it was $12.95,
Mhm.
and it seemed like a lot of money at the time. I go to Dr. No's comic book store here in Marietta, Georgia. Cliff Biggers owns it, and he's the smartest guy I know, and the nicest guy I know. And I looked at it and I went, this is a gimmick to take money from kids, and I wasn't going to buy it. And he gave it to me. He said, "Look, if you don't do this, you'll hate yourself."
Hmm.
And I took it home and did it, and I won first place out of. I think the number was like 19,000 people, but I figured 18,900 were 12-year-olds. Erik Larsen, and I'm not kidding. He swears he came in second. Now he may be bullshitting because Erik Larsen, Erik Larsen,
Yeah.
but he swears it anyway. So that I was home 3-4 months after the contest, maybe longer than that, and I get a phone call, and some woman from Marvel, girl from Marvel, "Hey, you won the trial contest. Great. What now?" "Oh, we'll be in touch." I didn't hear a word, not a word for like 6 months,
Oh,
and
wow.
I was getting frustrated, and because I was not going to be a 30-year-old guy walking around. I was 27 at the time, 26. I wasn't going to be a 30-year-old guy walking around a convention going, "Hey, look at my stuff."
Right.
Then it wasn't, God willing, it just wasn't meant to be. And so an early Dragon Con, they had one, and it had gotten bigger, from the first time I'd gone to one. And Shooter came down, and John Romita Sr. came down, and Byrne was there, and a couple other big name guys were there. And so I said, I'm going to go down to Dragon Con, and I'm going to see Jim Shooter. Right. So I go and I pay my attendance fee, and I run into Jim Shooter in the lobby of the hotel, and he's surrounded by people. And Jim Shooter was 6'9",
Yeah.
dressed in black with a tie, and he's craggy face and scary as shit looking. And I'm 5'7", and well, now I'm 5'6" because I'm old. But I walk up to Jim and I wait for everybody to stop talking to me. I says, "Hey, Mr. Shooter," and I'm looking up like this. And, yeah, he says, "I'm Mark Bagley. I won Mark Bagley. You won a trial contest." Like he knew it, which
Right.
right. I said, "Yeah," and I haven't heard anything. I'm wondering what's going on. He says, "We've really dropped the ball on this. Things been really busy. We're going to get you to New York, and you meet the editors, and we'll take it from there." And I was so young and so naive. I looked at him and I said, "I can't afford to fly to New York." And he patted me on the top of my head. He said, "It's okay. We'll fly." He literally patted me on the top of my head. So they flew me to New York with Doug Hazelwood, who won the inking part of it. And he's always worked for DC. He's retired now.
Mhm.
And we spent 3 days in New York being thrown out of everybody's office because Jim Shooter was out of town. He'd gone to Europe to handle some shit, and nobody knew I was coming. And, Howard Mackey threw his may not have been Howard, but bunch of these guys did anyway.
Yeah.
Larry Hama was mean. Larry Hama was really mean to me, but he can be mean to people, but he's earned the right. But I was there. This is how things have changed. I said the last day I was there, it was 2 or 3 hours. I think 3 hours before the flight. I was still in the office. That's how you. That's how
Yeah.
you go to the last minute and jump on the plane. And I was sitting there doing art corrections and the bullpen and Ramirez Raiders, and I'm thinking, what the f, And I ran into Greg Wright, who was editing the New Universe line, which was going down in flames at the time.
Oh yeah.
It just needed bodies. It was mid flames. It wasn't quite flamed out. And so he gave me a one-shot thing, and he gave me another one-shot thing, and I worked with Fabian on one story, and I don't remember who else I worked with, but I did that for a while, and then I worked at Lockheed doing technical illustration, full time, and then I did comics for about a year and a half, and lived on about 4 hours of sleep a night.
Yeah.
Right about the time I was getting enough work to think about, and I was actually getting, a full-time gig. I would think I was doing Visionaries or something like that. Marvel started. Lockheed started laying off, and I was low man on the totem pole. So I hung on there for another couple of months. They moved me off my drawing gig to I was in a factory putting metal parts on a rack and swing shift. And I held on there just long enough. We wanted to buy a house, and I knew if I quit Lockheed and went freelance, we'd never qualify for a loan. And we closed on a house, and I quit the next day, and I've been doing comics ever since. The moral of that story, kids, is you get your shot. You get the trial book. You get whatever you want to do. You be ready for it, and you take the shot. It's like Eminem says,
you get one shot.
You get one shot, or with the Hamilton, I'm not going to miss my shot, whatever that line is.
I think Lee Harvey Oswald said that too.
Well, him really. So,
so let me ask you a question, because there's a book that's outside of Marvel, After Apocalypse, that's like around 87. But is that where does that come into your timeline? Because
Cliff and his friend Ward Batty, Cliff Biggers, my friend who gave me the book, they were doing some self-publishing. They did Comic Shop News for years and years and years, and they were self-publishing. And I was like I said, I was still waiting for work from Marvel. And they wrote this story and called After Apocalypse, and printed it. And it was a really, it was an interesting story. It's, it's a plague, and it's your typical thing like that. And I worked my ass off on it, and it shows up every now and then. It was oversized. The cover was. I drew the cover, and I forget who airbrushed it. Terrible, but the funny thing about that is, Dave Johnson, the cover artist and all around great guy. He was in high school at the time. He inked it.
So
he inked it. One paneling page I had to ink because he thought, you drew that wrong. I'm not going to ink that. And I'm like, you're fucking 14 years old or 15 years old. You're telling me you're not going to ink it? So I inked it myself.
That's amazing.
He's got a big head. Yeah.
Well, he's done well for himself too. I mean, maybe one of the greatest cover artists of all time at this point.
Don't know if I agree with that, but he is amazingly talented. That's for damn sure.
I was introduced to his work, I think, with 100 Bullets, because I think he did all the covers for 100 Bullets, or at least a big chunk of them.
But he likes doing, and he's done very little interior work, but what he does is really, really fucking good too. So
yeah. But that's the thing I like to find out about, is like, so this comic store that you used to go to that kind of is responsible for giving you this, for getting your start, and then also Dave Johnson's in there. It's it's a cool roadmap when you start to look at it.
My life revolves not like down the drain, but it revolves around that comic store in a lot of ways. Cliff has been a blessing in my life in a lot of ways. Just not a friend. I mean, when the Image guys took off and Acclaim kicked up and everybody's trying to steal everybody's artists.
Yeah.
Cliff was the one who called me and says, there's these, and this is back in the 90s when things got crazy. There are these huge contracts out there, and you should, you're a hot commodity. You need to, and he's the one who got me the gumption to, call. I forget who the hell I called. I think it was Jemis. Anyway, and said, I've heard about these contracts. I know what people are getting. you need to make me your best offer.
Yeah.
That
Yeah.
sort of, and I had no interest in leaving. I think I was doing Amazing Spider-Man at the time. I had no interest in leaving. You know, Jim Valentino actually, you know, kind of confronted me at a convention once, like, you need to come over, be smart, be smarter. And I'm like, and I got pissed at him. I'm like, dude, I'm doing fucking Spider-Man. You may
Yeah.
be times the money I'm doing, but nobody's ever fucking heard of Nighthawk. You know, I'm on a plane and they say, what do you do for a living? Well, I draw Spider-Man. They lose their freaking minds.
Yeah.
I get
Yeah.
Mark Bagley. So
So before we get to the webhead, New Warriors comes along. Fabian is doing the writing on it,
right.
and you start on issue one. That was a big thing, but also you were being inked by Al Williamson at the start, right?
Yeah, the first 2 or 3 issues.
Yeah.
And I never met him. I talked to him on the back. This is back when you talk to people on the phone.
Hmm.
Yeah, I was excited about New Warriors. It was like I felt like my first real comic book. You know, I'd done
Sure.
story and, you know, the guys with the balls on their chin and all that. And yeah. And yeah, now Williamson and God, he made my stuff look good. It just, you know, it was finished everything. But after I think it was 2 issues, he calls me. He says, Mark, I'm leaving the book. I said, you are? Yeah, you're making work too fucking hard. I wish I could get you here to show you how to streamline things. I was learning as I go along. You look at,
Yeah.
my God, the stuff I was doing in New Warriors, hell, the trial contest stuff. I redrew the entire thing. Uh, I'm drawing a blank. Al Milgram was the editor on that, or was
Okay.
it Salicrup, Jim Salicrup.
Hmm.
And he basically had me redraw the entire thing and kind of streamline it and do that sort of thing. So it was a learning process for me the entire time. And I was learning issue by issue. And when you're that young and you're working that hard, you can learn really fast.
Yeah.
But he's like, you're making me work too fucking hard. I wish you could get you, and literally he said fucking hard. I wish I'd get you up here and I could really show you some stuff. And so we were lucky enough that, you know, we were in a good enough shape and the book was doing well enough. This is after the second, third issue, that they gave me a chance. They tried out some guys. I think Fabian, you know, he's an editorial at the time as well as doing that. And Danny Fingeroth, they actually sent some of my pages out to a couple of guys for sample inks, which
Oh, wow.
such a new artist. I don't think they do very often. They pretty much slap you with somebody.
Sure.
And we got Larry Malstadt inking it, and he was great. And he finished my stuff, and it looks clean and all that stuff. And screw out, you don't know what he's talking about. No, I'm kidding. But you know, and the book just did phenomenal. I mean, it was such a characters nobody gave a shit about, and Fabian's writing was so. I've been blessed with really good writers and really good timing on stuff. You know, so.
Yeah, that book, the first issue hit a second printing, and that was kind of odd for those times. Like now that I think about it, you've had probably in that era, the early '90s to the mid '90s, you've probably had more issues go to reprint than any other artist because everything. Well,
I don't
what'd you
know.
say?
I don't know. I don't know anything about that, but I know that I was busy and I was fortunate to be on some, you know, I mean, Thunderbolts was, who knew Thunderbolts would be a thing? That first issue exploded people's brains, you know,
Yeah,
and that's
it did.
because, you know, all these other guys had gone off to do their thing, and I'm still at Marvel having fun.
So during New Warriors, that's when they told you were getting Amazing Spider-Man.
Yes,
That Larsen was leaving.
Yeah, Danny Fingeroth was editing both books, and he knew that, you know, he knew if he didn't give it to me, I'd fucking shoot him. And I live in Georgia; I have guns. And yeah, I felt it was fun. It's a funny story. I don't know how much time we have, but I was out in San Diego when Erik Larsen got the gig, and I thought actually I was the one. I'd done a couple fill-in issues, and I sort of thought I was the next in the queue to land on a Spider-Man book. And I wasn't feeling good at the time about a number of things, you know, so I wasn't in a good headspace. I don't like big crowds. I was in San Diego. I was out there with a friend of mine, Charles Rutledge, who's 6'6" and about 210, and he teaches Shotokan karate. And the Marietta police hired him to beat them up, to do, you know. And so he was out there with me, and so I was out there, and I got the word that Erik had been given Amazing Spider-Man. I was like, son of a fucking bitch. But, you know, I saw him at a party that evening or the next night, and I walked over to him, and I was going to congratulate him because, you know, good for him. You know, that's good for him. And Erik, who's a real subtle son of a gun, you know, proceeds to tell me exactly what I'm doing wrong. I mean, I've had critiques from everybody, John Byrne to John Romita. John Romita was a saint. You know, they've run the gambit. I got so mad so fast with him because he was telling me exactly what I was doing. You know, telling me what he thought, exactly what I was doing, what I need to do. Yeah, he didn't say, thank you or whatever. It's like I got so, and Erik's a big guy, but I got 5 brothers. I was in the army.
Yeah, yeah.
I'd have destroyed him especially at the time. Now I'm old, but Charles grabbed me from behind, picked me up, literally picked me up, and Casey, Mark, you don't want to do that. And my feet kicking like this, man, and I'm gonna fucking kill him. But I got home and I sat down and I started thinking about what he said to me, and some of the things he was saying were right because I was really I've been kind of locked into the storytelling laws of Jim Shooter and the old school guys, and which are a lot of really good laws and really good rules, but they should be broken because they're not laws and rules. They're just, a style. And so if you'll notice in my first issue of Spider-Man, no, I think I was doing Captain America backups at the time. I started breaking panels. I started doing things that these guys were doing. I still wanted to do storytelling.
Sure.
For guys, don't want to do anymore. They just want to do splash pages and shit. But I thought, I can meld the two of them, and it could be pretty cool. And it was pretty cool because it got me amazing. So
Well, from my perspective as a kid growing up and like jumping into McFarlane's Amazing Spider-Man, then into Larsen, then into yours, it was like a whole new world because they were breaking all of those types of storytelling rules, at least that Marvel was doing, but it was refreshing. And I think had it not happened, who knows where comics would be if that progression doesn't happen.
God bless the Image guys and what they did. What they say, the rising tide raises all boats. I mean, they put a shot in the arm of the industry, just with a number of the guys just flat out talent. I mean, so Mark Silvestri and McFarlane, just that, and it was just the time and the balls to do what they did and to make competition that much stiffer. Because up until then, it'd been the big two and independents, and I rode that tide.
Yeah. And then you were the one who was the lone ship in the sea, pretty much after they all left, and that's your ASM run is so.
JR was still around doing okay too, so he was.
Well, yeah, you're right. The Daredevil stuff.
There are guys out there
amazing.
Still doing great, but I mean, it contract wise and lifestyle wise. I mean, I got into this thinking my wife would always work. I'd make a middle class, and if you factored in the hours, a lower middle class income because I was weak, and you had to do that before.
Yeah.
And the 90s kicked off and the royalties started coming in and page rates went up because my first page rate was $75 a page. You had to do 4 pages a day to make a living. 3 pages anyway. It's amazing the quality of work the old guys did, like Gil Kane and John Romita and John Buscema. God, my nipples get hard when I think about his work. The quality of the work they did at the pace they had to do it.
Yeah.
What do you think they could do if they could spend a month on or 3 months on a comic like a lot of these guys do nowadays?
Yeah. Like guys, like even like Neil Adams, like he was pumping out some amazing stuff, and then you can't discount that Jack Kirby guy.
Jack Kirby, they go, oh, you Ultimate Spider-Man, you broke the record. Jack Kirby and the other guy, Stan. Yeah, I did, but you know what? Jack was also drawing 2 other comics and doing all covers. So
and like his mind was its own universe
too,
Yeah, like he lived in a world that he literally created. It's wild. So with ASM, you start on 351. Obviously, a lot of people want to talk about Carnage and the creation of Carnage. One of the questions I actually wanted to ask you about 361, specifically the cover, Silver Surfer 4, little homage to that. Thor and Surfer going at it. That great John Buscema cover.
Actually, no. I never even gave that a thought.
Huh.
I'm serious. not trying to be a smart ass. I know the cover you're talking about. Never crossed, to be honest, it never crossed my mind.
Huh. It's just a beautiful coincidence. Obviously,
Well, a lot of times, I mean, I did this great shot of a Spider-Man hanging on a wall. Yeah, I forget. I don't know. Couldn't tell you what issue. Couldn't even tell you, whatever. But just like a month, I drew it, and like a month later or 2 months later, the comic comes out, and there's an ad in there, and Jim Lee did the art for the ad. It's the Punisher and Spider-Man in the background in almost exactly the same position that I drew. I mean, almost exactly. And he could not have seen it. There's no way.
right?
Jim is not fucking swiping for me. Trust me. You know. So it was just one. It's just kismet, as they say.
Yeah. Yeah, because I also think like probably, and I'm not a comic book creator, but in the thought of a comic book creator, you want to make a super dynamic piece of art, especially if it's going to be a large piece or a splash page. And it's like our
Right.
brains only, we're all linked anyway. We're all sharing the same oxygen and stuff. So you might be just
That really grosses me out.
well, I'll steer away from that.
Uh,
The reason why I said manga, the speed lines. Oh, hello. The speed lines on 362 kind of they weren't. I talked to McFarlane about it, and he talked about looking at Akira and adding speed lines to things because he saw Atomo, and that's why I was just wondering if you had ever looked at manga because there is some really dynamic stuff.
I had the entire Akira run. I bought the
Mhm.
trades that they came out with and that sort of thing. And I was influenced by them. I was influenced by that. I was influenced by what Erik had done before me.
Mhm.
I was looking for ways, to be better. I'm always.
Sure.
I mean, that's why my stuff I think is better now than it was. People will argue, "Oh, I love to say." I'm always trying to figure out what I'm doing, and I'm
Mhm.
always trying to stay relevant. And I know that if I do the same thing every day, within 5 years, 10 years, people will either be bored with it, or C, you're going to look like that old guy doing the same thing you did 10 years ago.
Yeah.
And if you look at my last run on Amazing Spider-Man compared to what I did on Ultimate Spider-Man compared to what I did, because they're all 10, 15 years apart,
Yeah.
there's a progression, and that
Mhm.
progression is intentional. It isn't me planning on drawing a certain way or whatever. It's just I'm always learning and are trying to. And I think some artists, I've never talked to anybody about this. I think some artists, they can draw something and retain it in their head. That's how it's drawn. And
Yeah.
draw it again every time. With me, I don't know how they do that, because if I'm drawing Head and Shoulders reaction, that sort of thing, even to this day, I'll go back. How's that fucking work again? A lot of times, or if I'm having to draw a tank or a truck, or um, I'm always using reference, and I'm always trying to, like, you're gonna end up, there's only so many ways to draw somebody punching somebody,
Yeah.
have it be dynamic and not wonky and weird. So sometimes I'll be drawing something and went, oh my god, that's exact, and you just don't realize it. Like Spider Side, I guess. What was that character? What is the character I came up with in near the end of the Clone Saga?
It
He's got
was
the same costume as I redesigned the Ben Riley costume.
yeah, the Scarlet Spider.
I never saw it until somebody brought it up online. I'm like, oh god, So this shit's gonna happen.
Yeah. And
I'm old.
Lyle,
I've been here a long time.
that's well, but the thing is, and kind of a testament to what you just said, if you look at the ASM run, the Ultimate run, and then Life Story, you did get tighter, better somehow. Because I look
I always think of who the hell drew Flash Gordon? Because I'm drawing a blank right now.
Mac Rayboy? No.
Not Flash Gordon. No.
Uh,
Yeah, Flash Gordon. Ray. Oh, it's over on my damn bookshelf.
uh,
Anyway,
I know
his
who you're talking about. And
Ferris, I can't remember his name right now. But you look at his early stuff, and it's well drawn, but by the time he's done and he's doing his Sunday strips and everything, it is so polished and so pretty and so beautiful. Hal Foster was the same way. It was, I'm always trying to get better. I want to stay dynamic and everything. I don't want to be photorealistic,
Mhm.
but I want to be more complete as an artist. And yeah, I think, Life Story, the coloring was beautiful and the inking was great, and that
Yeah.
huge difference. So
Yeah, yeah, but I got bored of counting last night, but I think you have actually, besides the record on Ultimate Spider-Man in the comic book format, if we take the comic strips out of it, you've spent more time drawing Spider-Man than I think any other artist in history.
I hear that from people who actually, like pay attention to these things. Because
Yeah,
I couldn't tell you how many comics I've drawn. I couldn't tell you how many issues I've drawn. I couldn't tell you what number issue of whatever. 361's so famous that
sure.
it's always being put in front of my face. But guys who follow this sort of thing say I've drawn more Spider-Man comics than anybody.
Yeah.
Including JR Jr., who's probably close, and probably Umberto. He's done a ton of them too.
Umberto, JR, and then Saviak because he did the strip for so long.
Saviak, yeah, I don't know if the strip counts.
Well, that's what I'm saying. Yeah, I was probably just talking about the comic book format.
Yeah.
But at the time, you jump on board with Michelini, and was he? I mean, he wrote for so long. He wrote through that entire era, and it seemed that you guys got along real well. Like, I mean, there was some.
We did after the first couple issues.
Yeah.
He was so beat up by Todd and Erik ignoring the plot, doing what they wanted to do, and him having to come back and script over it. That, I mean, he was like, he had the 1,000-yard stare, and just, I remember I think it was my second issue, maybe the third. Anyway, it was 362. It had to be, because it was after the introduction of, no, wait, it wasn't. Hang on. Anyway, it's one of those issues. Johnny Storm, Johnny Storm and Spidey are in the Fantastic car heading out to an island to hook up with Venom. I remember exactly. And the plot, because we were still doing plot back then, but the splash page was always fully realized by the writer, called for, I forget if it was just a close-up of Johnny or something, but it just didn't strike me as enough of an establishing shot of what the hell was going on. So I split it into two panels with a diagonal, which I almost never used, but a diagonal between the two panels, just like SD car, and then a close-up of Johnny and Spidey. And this is back, like I said, we used to talk on the phone, and he called me, and he was furious. He was pissed, or maybe Danny called me and told me he was pissed. I think it was David, who's a really mellow, kind of low-key guy, and because he said, no, you can't be doing it. You can't be changing my panels every, this is important, especially splash page, that sort of thing. And I said, and I talked him off the ledge. I said, look, I'm the visual storyteller. I am not here to ignore I'm here to tell your story in the best visual way I can. And I said, I'm sorry you're upset with this, but I know it works better. And I'm not going to change something just to change it. If I change it, it's because visually it either doesn't work or this is going to work better. It's not to ignore what you're doing and not to change what you're doing. If you're going from A to D, if I have to swap B and C, even A and C to get to the same place, you haven't scripted it yet. You still have to script it. So I haven't torn up your script. I'm just visually telling it. And it will probably be easier to script. And Brian Bendis will tell you, he dropped a lot of dialogue out of Ultimate Spider-Man because he would say plots, and his plot, and it was full. His were full scripts. And I would, not a ton, because he's too damn good to have to change too much, but I would do it enough that he would go into it and go, oh, I don't need no words there, And I've had writers where it doesn't matter what it looks like. It absolutely does not need words. They'll put words on top of it. And that's why I loved Ultimate Spider-Man working with Brian. He knew, he's such a good storyteller. He knows when to.
He does. And as an artist, you're, if we're looking at it in movie terms, you're the DP and the director almost. And, there are points where director has to look at a script and be like, well, let me shoot it this way instead. Tells the story better.
People who don't know comics, it's like I'm the director of the movie. I get the script, and especially now that it's a full script. God help me if I got a plot nowadays. I don't know what the hell I do with it. And that's how I describe what I do.
Yeah. And you're also like, even at the worst of the height of the 90s, where books were coming out and stuff was getting delayed, like, you were known for hitting your deadlines and never being late and being this, it's pretty impressive in that time specifically.
I was in the Army and raised mindset. Well, for 3 years, got me out of high school, and I mean, got me out of the house.
Yeah,
But I did construction for 3 years. Showed up to work every day. You know what a skill saw is? A circular
I do.
saw. I put one in my thigh once, so over 100 stitches. Um, I know what it's like to have a real job, and,
Yeah.
and this is my dream since I was a kid. And like I said, I thought you had to do 3 or 4 pages a day to make a living.
Hmm.
And the reason I got better work after the Captain America backups I was doing is because I slowed down actually to like a page and a half. And my wife was pissed because she just quit her job. But you know, I love it, and I get up and 10 hours a day was nothing to me because the first 8 hours is kind of fun. The last couple usually were like disciplined. You're tired and you're running out of your talent tank is running out of gas, and it refills every morning. You get up the next morning, something you couldn't draw for an hour and a half to that night. The next morning you get up and go, oh yeah, that's it. But there was that plus the 90s. You give a kid a 5-figure royalty check for one issue of a comic, and he's 20 years old or 18 years old. What the hell is he going to do? He's going
Yeah.
to here and buy a motorcycle for a while anyway. Me, I had a wife and a kid in the house and a dream job, and I knew it wasn't going to last. This whole huge collector's boom.
Yeah.
And I just, I worked harder. I did. I worked hard because, I was not going to look at this amazing, I just read a biography of JR, John Romita and John Romita Jr. I've got it over on a bookshelf. I couldn't tell you who wrote it to save my life. But they go in, and I knew, you know that the comic book artists back in the day had it rough.
Yeah.
And the book doesn't go into like gory detail of it all, but they let you know how rough it really was, and it wasn't easy when I got into it. I've been very fortunate when I got in my career because
Yeah.
it changed so fast and got so lucrative for quite a while, and it's still way more lucrative than I ever thought it would. Plus, being where I am in my career, but I don't know, today with AI and all this other bullshit coming on, and all these wonderful artists from Eastern Europe and South America and all the competition, and the page rates are coming back down and inking rates are coming back down, and
Yeah.
uh, I'm glad I'm not starting my career now. I was talking to Ed McGuinness at a convention a few months ago, and we were talking about this, and we're both like, if we both were drawing like we were when we broke in, neither one of us would be working in the business now, at least in mainstream, because we weren't good enough. We're not even close to good enough.
Yeah. Yeah. You have to, there's a very small amount of people that could come in and be super successful without, even thinking about writing a book for TV or doing something where it's like, I'm going to sell this to Netflix or something. It is kind of sad in that way, but I don't know. I don't know where the industry goes. In You spoke about the collector boom. Let's talk about this one right here, Wizard 26. This is your only cover that you did for Wizard. This
I
is the
vaguely remember it.
yeah.
What, Hobgoblin or something?
What'd you say?
Was it Hobgoblin or
It's
something?
Hobgoblin, but the story is, and I don't know, because Gareb Shamus is Gareb Shamus. He's the Vince McMahon of comics. Um, did you originally draw that cover as Green Goblin? We'll get back to the interview in just a second, but don't forget to like, subscribe if you're new here, and leave a comment down below. What's your favorite Mark Bagley book? Or maybe just say hello. I have an audio podcast called Direct Edition. You'll find this interview on there as well. Without further ado, back to me and Mark Bagley having a chat. There's a story that you did, but I've never seen that cover that supposedly exists.
I don't think so.
Okay.
That does not ring any chimes. I mean, I've done so much stuff, and somebody will drop something in front of me, and I'm like, "Whoa, I did that." That story doesn't ring a bell.
Okay. All right. And yeah, and it's interesting because you like how John Romita was during his, senior was, he was not just doing Spider-Man, he was their promo artist. Every promo piece that they put out in a certain time was John Romita. And your art kind of falls into that. Like you were doing the trading cards, right? You did Marvel series, some of one, some of two, and then there's this
Yeah,
series, which you're most known for, doing these 9-piece,
yeah.
you know,
got one of those on my wall, actually, on the other side of my studio. Yeah, for about 7 or 8 years, something like that, my Spider-Man was sort of the corporate Spider-Man.
Mhm.
Everything from mugs to everything, tents, puzzles,
Figures. Yeah.
whatever. Um, the only time I was really creeped out by it was we were going through a Target or something like that, and we were in the little girls section and looked over and there's my Spider-Man on the front of a little girl's panties.
That is
But
weird.
I'd heard from somebody that JR at the time had young kids, and
Mhm.
JR's way more talented than I'll ever be, and I love his stuff, but it's so kind of idiosyncratic and stylized that I think that's why his wasn't the go-to that it was. And apparently, I heard from somebody, and this may be bullshit, but it strikes me as funny is that he said he's walked to a store and his kid would look over and see a Spider-Man and go, "Is that your Spider-Man, Daddy?" No, you know.
Yeah, yeah, it kind of skipped over. I mean, I think, and maybe after that with McFarlane and Larson, they might have gotten a little rattled by the fact that those guys left because they weren't getting paid for that type of stuff. That's
Yeah,
one of the
I
reasons.
never I would get. I mean, Spider-Man's not my guy. I mean, I don't own him. I am a little peeved that DC pays overseas royalties and Marvel never has. But
Yeah,
I try. Like I said, I just feel blessed to be working and not slaving, and the money has always been kind of secondary to me.
right.
But you know, I I have the privilege to be able to say something like that. So
Yeah, yeah, but the trading card stuff is interesting because that was an entry for a lot of people to get into comics, and then it was kind of also the opposite of that was the lazy kid's way of saying, "Oh, I love comics. Yeah, I collect the cards." Well, and those two things are completely different from each other.
yeah,
But you left your mark on the card world in such a major way. Like, I'm not sure if you're aware of how, like, the last 5 years, how much it's come back in to the fold of collecting and how many people went back, especially during the pandemic, and started buying cards and sets and doing all that stuff. Like, it's almost they're not in comic stores anymore, which is a shame because they were a really great what's the word? Ancillary item, you
mhm,
know
yeah,
but that was the '90s, and that was also when Wizard was telling us what to buy, and
yeah,
also kind of the downfall.
yeah.
Um,
I don't know, like I said, I'm really way out of it now because hell, I barely read comics anymore.
yeah,
Give me the story and who's this guy and can he fly? But the cards was back then. I was looking for work. I can always do more than one comic a month, and you know that series that you talked about. I couldn't tell you which series it was. What Bill Jemas was actually the editor on that series,
right.
and that's what got him aware of my work, and that's how I got him Ultimate Spider-Man. And I didn't know Bill Jemis's name. I couldn't have told you Bill Jemis's name.
Well, sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
That's I'm good.
Um, Ultimate Spider-Man's like the second, like this is the second version of your Spider-Man run, and I read it as it came out in trade. And I
Yep.
know, and then I reread it maybe a couple years ago, like 2 years ago digitally. It was fun to revisit that. But so that's the end of the Harris era, right? Then Bob Harris was still the editor then?
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, he was the one who, yeah, yeah,
Yeah.
I guess a story there, but I'm not going to tell it.
um So when you started working with Bendis, and I've heard you say something to the fact that like you weren't sure that you really wanted to do it, or you weren't sure that you were going to
Oh, I
stick
turned
with
it
it.
down 3 times, and it was pitched to me as a 6-issue miniseries. And
Mhm.
I told him, no, I'm not going to, no, I'll do the 6. And because, the third time the third time or the second time they called me, third time they called me, I think I turned it out twice, maybe 3 times. Anyway, they said, look, you either do this or, forget about getting extra work. I was working, I don't know if I was doing Thunderbolts or whatever at the time. I think it was Thunderbolts. And,
Mhm.
John Byrne had just done his
The year, like
year,
it was like,
whatever the hell it was, but it had gone over like Martin Church. And, I just, I was a little burned out. I knew Harris really didn't want me on it. because I'd heard from a number of people, and he'll deny it, which is fine, that he wasn't crazy about my stuff. I mean, he didn't want me on Thunderbolts. He thought I wasn't hip enough and new enough and all that shit. And Kurt Busiek, but he tells the story and it's good. And so, they called me with this, and I'd never heard of Brian, and they actually had a design for Peter Parker already. For young Peter Parker. So I had assumed that they'd already gone to somebody else, but we decided not to use him. And the design was by an artist named Adam Polina, who was in the comic book business for about 5 minutes. And I think now he's like off doing fashion or something. He was more, I met Adam a couple of times. Real talented guy. Anyway, so, after a time, it's like, if you turn this down, you can forget kind of getting extra work. So I'm like, shit. And okay, I'll do it. And so that first issue, first issue is like a double size issue and 60 pages long. I'd never seen it like it. He had a double page spread with like 38 panels. And like I said, I didn't know anything about Brian. I just thought, he doesn't know what the fuck he's doing. I'm not drawing that. So somehow we made it through that. And by the third or fourth issue, I was starting to get it a little bit, but I didn't get, the fact that Green Goblin's not in costume. Spider-Man's not in costume the entire first issue. What the hell?
That's right.
It was so, and so I was going to leave after 6 because they called me and said, we're going to make it an ongoing and we'd like you to stay on. I said, nah, I don't think so. The first issue hadn't even come out yet. And so not much later, the first issue came out and it was sold really well. And it was on beautiful. First time I'd been on that kind of paper.
Yeah.
Archie Bear's inks were great and the coloring was really good. And I'm like, oh, and Cliff called me, Biggers. He says, dude, you need to stay on this book. He said, people love it. It's I was like, okay. So I called Ralph Macchio, the editor, and said, hey, I'd kind of like to stay on the book. And he was like, thank Christ, somebody thought, Bill Jemis called and said, why'd you fire Bagley? He said, he wanted to leave. And so Ancillary, funny story, Ancillary, a couple of years later, I'm in some convention out in Seattle or someplace where I didn't really want to be. It was Sunday morning. I was really kind of hungover and not in a good mood, and sitting in the lobby waiting to be bussed to the damn convention. And this little guy comes out, and I'm 5'7", and and he comes out and he walks up to me and he's like, "You Mark Bagley?" I said, "Yeah." He says, "I'm gonna kick your ass," and he sounded serious. And I stood up and I'm like, "Okay, let's go." And I was on him. He goes, "No, no, 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 no." Well, they'd offered him Ultimate Spider-Man, then called him like the next day, and he thought that they were calling to say he'd be on it sooner. They decided to stay on the book, and I can tell you that guy's name, but I'm drawing a total blank on his name right now. That's how my mind works. But he was like, "I'm going to kick your ass," and I was in a mood to kick somebody's ass.
Yeah. That was the wrong morning.
High school, and got my ass kicked enough in high school, but so
it's interesting, like you say about how you were not going to stay on that book, because in my reread, whatever it was, like two years ago, I was reading that first issue, and I'm like, it felt like there were points where you didn't feel like drawing some of the things, like the retelling of the origin in Ultimate Spider-Man of him getting bit by the spider. It's one panel, and
yeah,
then,
I know. But it's part of it. I was like, I think I did a good job on it. It sold well. I try to give, my best to some things, but sometimes you don't. My first issue of Thunderbolts, most embarrassing thing ever, because I was really not in a good space. And I didn't care about it. Because of some stuff that was going on in Marvel. And Tom Brevoort was the editor. He actually sent pages back to me. He told me to put more backgrounds in. He called me first. He says, "Look, it's really not." And I looked at it, and I talk about it. But you get tired, and you don't put some backgrounds in sometimes.
Sure.
Do something that you think is better, streamlined or whatever, and simpler to draw, which is always a plus. But I had just not been in the mood, which is not good.
Yeah.
My career never happened to me. So, yeah. So, Ultimate Spider, I didn't really start getting it until issue 4 or 5. And then I started, reading Brian's dialogue on top of my artwork. I think that made a big difference, because once I started published and I was reading the dialogue on top of the artwork together, I thought, man, this is something special.
And it was like I can cite that as one of, because I graduated high school in '97, so right around, I guess, when Thunderbolts kind of comes out. But yeah, I
I
graduate.
old God.
No, but the thing is like, as pretty much the story goes with most people, like you get to that point in high school and you stop reading comics for a little bit. And I clocked out of comics for maybe 2 years, and my friend handed me like Sin City, Watchmen, Sandman, so I started reading again. But Ultimate Spider-Man was what got me back into wanting to read Spider-Man books, and I read, like I said, the whole thing, um, twice, when it came out and then a couple years ago, and you can
I've read Planetary 4 times.
see, and that's a fantastic series.
Yeah.
Um, but that's the thing, like, I felt by, like, issue, whatever it is, like 10, 8, 9, somewhere in there, it starts to really you guys really start to get each other,
Hmm.
and that thing just sails. It's such an easy, fun read,
Yeah.
and it's
I,
both
I
of you.
I hear from so many people at conventions, it either got them into comics, especially girls. Can you say
Mhm.
girls anymore? Um, you hear more and more. I hear that more and more cons that either got them into comics or back into comics because it
Yeah.
was so accessible. There was no
Mhm.
backstory, there was no continuity, there was no crossovers with characters they'd never heard about. The only
Yeah.
ever had one crossover, and that was with the X-Men, and everybody knows the
Mhm.
X. Yeah.
And it kicked off a new, I mean, because Quesada takes over probably around issue 14, 15, somewhere. He becomes editor in chief, maybe a little bit later. And it kicks off this entire era of Marvel that gets me and a lot of people that are my age back interested, because then they start, Bendis, then you bring in Miller, and then you bring in Ennis, and all of
Right.
these guys start writing these great stories, and there's great artists involved, you and Steve Dillon and Steve McNiven, like all of these guys come in,
Hmm.
and it's kind of like the flagship being Ultimate Spider-Man that kind of leads the charge. So it was amazing to watch that. So you do 111 issues, right?
Right.
You know, breaking that record, but I wanted to ask you. You come back a little bit, and you're doing the cover for Ultimate Fallout 4, which is, now at this point it's legendary status because it's the Miles Morales coming into the
Oh yeah.
Marvel universe,
Yep.
and that I remember when that happened. And obviously, we live in a stupid country with stupid people for the most part, and there was a lot of controversy, even though we look at it through the lens of 20 years, and
Yeah.
Miles Morales is, an icon for so many kids right now. But was there anything specific about that time that you remember, or it's just another day at work?
Uh I remember when they introduced Miles, and I read it, and I guess Sarah Pacelli drawing it, and I remember reading it, going, "God, I wish I was drawing this." I mean, I'm old enough, and a lot of the stuff going on nowadays that is the controversy. I kind of agree with some of the controversy because a lot of stuff seems to be have agendas. That had
Sure.
that was just Brian.
Yeah, that was just a
Got,
brilliant character.
Brian's got biracial kids, and he's trust me, he's way more liberal than I am, and which is fine. It doesn't,
Yeah.
the point is his point of view was just pure from the heart,
Yeah.
which is why that kid, is such a wonderful character, and it doesn't seem like it's being really forced on you. You know, the funny thing about that cover is when you mentioned this is the one with his face is blacked out.
Yeah.
In a lot of the copies, I sold that original cover probably. I got I won't talk number. Anyway, a decent amount, but nothing crazy.
Yeah.
It sold on the aftermarket about 4 years ago for like $250,000. And I'm like, holy shit, So,
And the thing is,
oh,
the owner of
I'm
it.
raising my prices, you know. But it was
Well, do
just
you know Dinesh, who owns it?
I
He's
don't
the
I don't know if I know him or not.
Well,
I'm not.
he's a guy that he owns some of the bigger Spider-Man covers. He owns that. He owns 300. Um, don't feel so bad because he bought it, and now if he sold it now, talking four times that, five times that. So there's no way you could know. I,
Yeah, you can't worry about shit like that. Uh, I wish I'd kept more of my artwork when I had to sell it. I mean, it was part of my income back then.
Hmm.
I don't understand these guys who work fully digital, because you're cutting your own throats when it comes to, income. I've got a safe somewhere, with a stack of artwork, and that's just the stuff I'm keeping. And
Sure.
my kids, my grandkid, and and I've got stuff framed on my walls, and people have framed on my walls, and I've got stuff that people buy just to put in a safe someplace. You get done working digitally, you've got a file.
Yeah, you got
I
nothing.
don't get that at all. And I've actually a couple of guys have, who fully digital guys, they've gone to, at least they do covers and splash pages, practical,
Hmm.
digital, but covers and splash pages, which, are really usually the money shots.
Yeah.
But you talk about artwork, it's like, I sold all my New Warriors first issue pages and stuff like that, probably for, if it's headshots, a $15 page, maybe a full figure, $100 or whatever, that sort of thing. And there's a guy who's trying to collect the entire issue, and he started buying pages, and he's got all, I think the last I heard was but 3, maybe, or 4.
Wow.
And I think the last page he bought, he spent like $60,000 for. Um, so,
Well, and not to open up a rub of salt on the wound, but yeah, if you look at what's happened with your artwork just in the last 4 years, and how like we're talking 150 time multipliers on some of this stuff. I mean, I appreciate it for the fact that the progression of how art gets more popular, and now it's like, okay, well, here's Mark's art, and you don't still own the 361 cover, right?
hell no.
Yeah. And if that came to market today, we're talking $1 million
I
maybe.
do still have the Batman Spider-Man crossover cover.
That's a great cover. That's a great book.
That's collectible. No, I my early stuff is very hit and miss what I still own.
Yeah.
But I'm keeping more of it now just because I feel like I should.
Yeah.
I think the over under is, how long is he going to last? The minute stuff's going to be really go up in price. But I'm inking all my covers now because I can't do interiors. I'm too slow, and
Mhm.
I've a major announcement here. I'm semi-retired now. I've told Marvel I'm not doing interiors anymore. Um,
Okay.
I'm just doing commissions and things because I still love it. I still love the storytelling. If they throw something at me that, miniseries or something like that really, gets my juices flowing, I may do it. But just the daily grind of still 8, 9 hours a day, 10 hours a day, 6 days a week, I don't want to do that anymore. And
You've earned the right.
I get to enjoy the inking, and I get sorry, inker guys, I get to keep all the covers and decide which ones I want to sell and which ones I want to all that.
Well, A, you've earned the right, and B, I've never seen any of your pieces inked that you've inked, but I've seen your pages and your covers, and the pencils are absolutely stunning. I mean, you're a beast with a pencil. It's almost unfair that people inked over them.
Well, you say that, and it's like I did a double, triple size issue of Amazing Spider-Man, and one of the sections was done. I forget which issue. I got it over there, but Umberto Ramos did one of the sections,
Mhm.
the pencils, and they're fucking gorgeous. I mean, they're just amazing. And when the book came out, I don't know how late it was. I'm not saying the inker, is a bad thing. I'm just saying something happened because
Yeah.
like hell, And I was actually not a fan of Ryan Stegman when he's working on Superior Spider-Man stuff and all Superior Foes, whatever that was.
Mhm.
It just looked rough and sketchy and not something that appealed to me. And then I got back on doing some Venom stuff, and they sent me reference pages of his that were just penciled. And
Yeah.
his pencils are unbelievable. They can't be inked properly. That's the problem. And then you slap color. 9/10 of the colors out there, no offense, don't know what the fuck they're doing.
No.
It's just, you can't see what's been done. I had John Bell inking me on Amazing Spider-Man. Was it my Scarlet Spider-Man? Right? And like he's my lead. There are pages that should not be inked. I mean, they should be a coloring book, because an adult coloring book, because
Yeah.
they bring such a level of finish and panache to it. Panache, yeah, panache.
Panache. There's a great word. Do you think we'll ever, I mean, I know it's a task for somebody like a Scott Dunbier guy, do you think we'll ever get a Bagley artist edition? Is that something that there's ever been talk of?
People, people come to me and ask me, "Hey, we want to do this," and I just, if I'm face to face with them, I go, "Yeah, that sounds good. Yeah, we can do that." And when I get home, I'm like, "I don't want to fucking do anything.
Well, yeah, that's the whole thing. It's like you don't want to do any work.
I don't want to. I don't. I mean, my work speaks for itself. I'm the worst self promoter in the world. I mean, I got a Facebook page and Instagram page. I've never been to either one of them. God handles one, and a friend of mine named Amos handles the other one. Um, Spencer, my art agent's always after me to do a sketchbook or to do this or to do
Yeah.
shit. I barely got into doing prints, 10 years ago, and people have been doing prints forever. And I just,
Well, I mean, with a artist edition, it would take, somebody to track down some of the people that own these pieces and then come to you and scan what you have. But I I was at OAX this year, which is that original art expo run by comic art fans,
okay.
and somebody had one of your unused Ultimate Spider-Man covers. It was the Venom one, and I think you just redrew it. But they had one where it's like he's messing with the trade dress, and it's the first time I had seen your pencils like that, and it was just incredible to see the line work. And I'm like kind of bummed because yeah, once somebody inks over it and then colors over it, it loses a little bit of that.
It
Uh,
loses that. Yeah. I'm not a big fan of blue line because I like when I'm done to have just the one piece. You know,
mhm.
line inking. If somebody doesn't know what that is, you scan it, you send it off to inker, and he prints it out on blue line paper and inks it there. So you end up with the inked version that was actually printed and the original pencils. And so, collectability wise and value wise and artistic wise, that just I don't feel good about it. But I've got just pages that I've penciled because I worked blue line some when you had to, and yeah, it's nice to see them. And
Yeah.
it's like those covers I did for Ultimate Spider-Man. None of them were ever inked. They were all done. They went directly to paint, to inking,
Okay.
to coloring, and the first, the second Richard Easonoff started coloring them, and I couldn't tell you which issue that was, but it's like they look like oil paintings. I mean, they look
Mhm.
freaking amazing.
Yeah, yeah, that some of that stuff really is impressive. Speaking of Spider-Man and your life with him, Life Story, which is another book that I read probably like 2018, 2019 in trade, and it got me into wanting to read superhero stuff again. Um, did Chip come to you?
Last story that long ago already?
Well, yeah, I think it's about 6 years old now.
God, time flies.
Did Chip come to you with that? Were you familiar with him
I
when
was
that came up?
work it because I think he'd been writing Spider-Man for a while. And he'd been around for a while, and I'm not reading a lot of stuff now, but I knew the name and I knew that he was a new up and coming rising art writer. No, I'm pretty sure I got an email from the editors, asking me if I wanted to do this, and um, I was like, okay, and they gave me the premise, and I had no idea it'd be as popular as it was. I didn't know if anybody would be interested in it at all. I got the idea of it. I think Chip got pissed at me because he wanted me to make Peter fatter every issue, thicker, and I'm like, wait a minute, he's still Spider-Man. He's still flipping around. He's doing, he's got the superpower. Okay, maybe he's not, Ultimate Spider-Man thin anymore. But I mean, I'm 67 years old and I still look pretty darn good. So it's like, you look at JR Jr., fucking, he's got a painting up in an attic.
Beefcake.
Yeah, exactly. So by the last issue when he's in his 60s, I've got him. He's kind of in a coverall because I didn't want to try and draw him muscled up or anything like that. But I had no idea it'd be as popular as it was, and people really seem to like that book.
It was great, and it you've been able to be part of a book that taps into some really emotional stuff twice now with Spider-Man. Obviously the death of Spider-Man, Ultimate Spider-Man, but then this is another emotional roller coaster, and I think it's one of those books that the mainstream should still be talking about because it was done so well. And probably my favorite Marvel book in the last 10 years. No, it
Wow.
is. It
Thank you.
is. Yeah. Yeah. I read that and Silver Surfer Black probably around the same time. And those two books just, it was like, oh, okay. So they're still making good stuff at Marvel.
You know, there's still, comics are just like TV. It's
Yeah.
like there's a lot of crap out there, but there's
Oh,
still
yeah.
some stuff, and there's still some talented guys. And if you care about it, screw the variant covers and shit. Just read the books.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, that's at the end of the day, like you can judge a book by its cover. Sure, you could pick up a book and be like, this cover's awesome. This book sucks,
I
or
just
vice versa.
But the Frank Frazetta covers, I went, holy shit! Look at this cover. That's got to be good.
Yeah, yeah. But no, that's something, and I'd love for more people to read it. But I think it's still a couple years off. But when the 10th anniversary hits of that book, I'm going to invite both you and Chip on to talk about it because
Okay.
it really is such a great book. Anyway, last question I'll ask you: did you end up buying a Cadillac after Venom 2? You joked about that.
I got no money for that. Carnage a long time ago, so no.
Yeah, yeah. Um,
Not.
so any
House after 361 and Venom Lethal Protector one. I mean, I bought a house after that, so
yeah.
that's
Oh,
a
yeah, man.
you know.
We didn't even get to talk about Lethal Protector. I forgot about Trinity, and you did Hulk with Mark Wade. There's a lot still
I
to talk about.
one issue, maybe two issues with three. I don't know, but Mark had to get off that book for a couple of reasons, so I
Right.
was upset about that.
But you did 52. Did you do all 52 issues of Trinity?
Yeah, well, the first halves, the second
Yeah.
half by Scott McDaniel and Tom Derenick, and yeah, I got his name right. But yeah, it came out weekly, and by the end of it, I wanted to shoot myself. And Kurt wanted it to be a murder suicide.
Yeah, DC is they've hit every time they hit the reset button, it feels like it never really holds. It goes, it's good, and then it just kind of like they change.
I worked my ass off in that book, but the thing I was upset about was I went to DC. I really wanted to draw Batman, Superman, Wonder Woman, those guys, and they pitched this Trinity thing to me, and it was very like, it's going to be these guys. We don't know what the story is yet, that sort of
Yeah.
thing. We story meeting, and by the end, by the sixth issue, it was everybody but Batman, Superman, and Wonder Woman, and Batman was a god, and I'm like, what the fuck? Hurt. I don't blame Dan DiDio. I just think it's just one of these things that it kind of went sideways.
Yeah.
And I did my best work all the way through, and it was fun drawing, the Amazo robot. It was fun drawing Ragman. It was, that sort of thing. But yeah, we can talk more in depth on that later if you'd like.
Yeah, yeah. So any cons coming up? Are you going to be at New York or anything?
No, I'm not doing New York this year. I'm doing. What am I doing? I'm going to Oahu in about a month. Yay! That'll be fun.
Nice.
Yeah, that'll be fun. And got one other coming up. I don't know. I don't like I said, I don't keep track of this shit.
Yeah. Fair enough.
I
Fair
can.
enough.
It was last week.
I'll put whatever, like there's Facebook, and I know you said you don't go on it, but I'll put those links in the description below. And then lastly, Spencer Beck is your art rep.
Yes.
So any art sales will go through him.
Yes. And
right.
And he handles my commissions and stuff like that because he can say no easier than I can.
Yeah, understandable. All right, well, Mark, I really appreciate the time, and I'll put any relevant links in the description below for people that really haven't read Spider-Man Life Story. Get your LCS to order you a copy and read it because you'll love it. Yeah. And anything else you want to promote before we sign off here?
No, not
All
really.
Right. All right. Well, I'm gonna hit end on the recording
now, so I'm having fun doing that. So I just got to do a couple of Galactus, and Galactus is always so much fun to draw.
Oh. Thanks for watching, and once again, please hit the like button, subscribe if you're not, check out my podcast Direct Edition. You can find all the links down below, as well as any relevant links to the conversation we were having. And thank you, and I'll see you next week on the West Coast Davengers. Slow fade out.
You froze up again.